A $700 billion market. What kind of growth rates are we expected to see?
So, well, over the next 5 years,
$1 million, excuse me.
Yeah, I was going to say, over the next 5 years, we could easily see about a 34–35% compound annual growth rate in this market. But to be clear about what we're talking about here, we are talking about the so-called off-grid market. There are about 1.2 billion people in the world right now who really have zero access to anything related, looking like a grid. And so what we're talking about here is the most basic kind of energy services that solar lanterns and sort of pico solar systems can provide. This is the most basic kind of electricity we're talking about here.
So what are the most promising markets for off-grid solar?
So certainly in East Africa and Southeast Asia and South Asia have been good markets and potentially will be great markets going forward, in the sense that that's where the largest population in the world lives without access to any electricity. And we've certainly seen a lot of activity in countries in East Africa and in India to date. A lot of times what we're talking about, though, realistically, are literally solar lanterns, little lamps that you can simply give a child to use to study or to read by night. And that may not sound like a lot to us in the Western world, but when you're talking about households that these days are burning kerosene for lamps or using candles, this is a much better, it's a safer solution. It's actually a cheaper solution in the long run as well for most households. And when I say long run, I mean within a year, it can make much more financial sense to own a solar lantern than to be using candles.
Ethan, I wanted to ask you whether you thought that the two things that come to my mind are the real issues at play here. One, a huge percentage of these people live in areas where there is a tremendous amount of sunlight, on the one hand, and second of all, the cost of solar, photovoltaic solar technology has really dropped. Are those the sort of two big factors here?
Yeah, that's really what makes this such an exciting time for this sector and this industry, and that's where the opportunity truly lies. Solar, 5 or 10 years ago, would have been considered too expensive in many far-flung communities. Although, to be clear, there were a number of pioneers out there trying to do solar in these areas some years ago. One potential analogy, which has certainly been raised, is when you look at these communities, whether or not so-called off-grid solar could develop in the way that mobile telephony did. That is, that no one has ever built hub-and-spoke telephone systems out to many of these far-flung communities, and yet in many cases people have cell phones already. And in fact, that's part of what's going to drive demand for these solar systems, because people want to charge those phones.
How much government support does off-grid need to gain momentum?
It's a really interesting question, because in some countries, off-grid, the best thing government can do is get out of the way. So frankly, not imposing high tariffs on imported solar goods, allowing local players to operate freely to sell the equipment without having to pay off local bribes or pay taxes. A lot of the most exciting and interesting things that we've seen are from companies like M-Copa, D-Light, and others, who really operate quite autonomously and get out in the field and make this stuff happen.
Ethan, it's a great point that demand for mobile telephony could really drive this. And I wonder, given we've seen all this energy coming from Google and Facebook in particular, very, very affluent companies that are trying to sort of spread internet access around the world, do you think they may end up financing a lot of what you're predicting here?
Well, there's certainly interest in the technology community, and I did mention some of those companies I just mentioned have been funded by folks like Khosla Ventures, by Schneider Electric, by mobile phone companies as well. Clearly, there is an interest on the part of larger companies to want to get into these markets and fund these activities. So yes, I think there's definitely that potential out there. Before I finish, I did just want to say thanks, and just to say that for those who want to learn more about this, you can read the report on our website at bnef.com, and we partner with the World Bank in producing this report, and we're very, very proud of it.